Chapter 8. Betrayed, King Duncan said. Why would his own people betray him? Last I heard, Erak was a popular choice as Oberjarl. It was the following morning, and even Baron Erold's spacious office in Castle Redmont was looking slightly crowded with the numbers present. In addition to the king and his daughter, Lord Anthony, Crowley, Halt, Pauline, Baron Erold, Sir Rodney, Horace, Gillen, Will, and Alice were all seated around the central desk, where Erold was given precedence to the king. Svengal, exhausted by his ride from Erlewin, was still sleeping off the effects of the journey, although, Will thought with grim humor, the effects might be a little longer lasting than he expected. A novice rider, Svengal would be stiff and sore in the morning. Every muscle and joint would be aching. The previous evening, after Will had reported the basic facts of Svengal's arrival, it had been decided to leave the detailed discussion till the morning. The wedding celebration had continued as if there had been no interruption. That had been at Lady Pauline's decision. As she had said to Halt some weeks earlier, this was a big occasion for many of the guests, perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to brush shoulders with royalty. Let them enjoy themselves, she said. We can deal with this in the morning. Halt smiled at her as she said it. It was confirmation of the Baron's good judgment in appointing her to the high diplomatic position. Pauline also had an ulterior motive. She knew full well that this would be one of the few occasions in her life where she could persuade Halt to dance with her, and she had no intention of letting it pass merely because Oberjarl Erak had carelessly gotten himself captured by the Aridi. It was, she thought, a matter of retaining a sense of perspective. So the dancing and feasting had continued. Then, just before midnight, an open carriage pulled by 2 white mares had arrived at the entrance to the dining hall. The newlyweds led a procession down the center aisle, and they were cheered abroad by the horde of well-wishers. In addition, hundreds of others had arrived from the village itself, where the Baron had contributed 2 steers to be roasted and several kegs of ale for a giant outdoor feast. These newcomers lined the path to the gatehouse, where the massive drawbridge and portcullis were. Others waited outside, on either side of the road winding down the hill toward the forest. As the carriage passed by, they pelted it with flowers and cheered in equal amounts. Halt, who had spent a life in covert activities, moving unseen and unnoticed through the country, found it a novel and an uncomfortable experience to be the center of attention. He felt strangely exposed without the comforting concealment of his camouflage cloak, and slumped low in his seat, trying to disappear into the plush cushions. Lady Pauline, on the other hand, sat upright and waved regally at the cheering people. And since the vast majority of those who arrive to gawk at weddings go to see the bride in any case, his retinence went largely unnoticed. "Where will they be going?" a blacksmith's wife asked to nobody in particular, as the carriage clattered down the hill. A housewife next to her, one of those people who always know the answer to every such question, replied with smug certainty. "I've heard that deep in the woods there's a special love nest been built for them, a bower of flowers and precious materials where they'll spend the night." Her imagination fired by her own statement, she added authoritatively, "What's more, there are specially trained songbirds in the trees, and pure white deer will be grazing in the clearing for my lady's enjoyment." The actual facts were more mundane. The carriage would stop at a little cabin just in the fringe of the forest, where Halt and Pauline would wait until the crowd had dispersed, and then would board another, less ornate carriage drawn by 2 nondescript bays, and return to the castle, where Erold had set aside a suite of rooms as their permanent residence. So here they all were, discussing the remarkable turn of events that Svengal had brought about their door. Erak's probably with the majority, Will told the king in answer to his question. But there's a small fraction in Hallsholm who would like to see him lose his position. Small, but vocal and persistent. I assume our treaty has something to do with this? Crowley asked. When Halt had led the Scandians to a victory over an invading Temanjai force, he had capitalized on the opportunity by creating a treaty where large-scale raids on Ereluen were discouraged by the Oberjarl. In Erak's case, discouraged translated pretty much as forbidden. It doesn't help, that's for sure, Will said. And the anti-Erak faction are using it as a lever to create dissension among the others. But it goes deeper than that. If there's an anti-Erak faction, Lady Pauline said, one assumes that they must also have their own leader in mind. Who might that be? Do we know? We do, Will told them. Although he and Horace had both been privy to Svengal's news, they had decided that Will would conduct the briefing for the others. It was part of a ranger's training to know how to assemble and report facts as cohesively as possible. It's a man called Toshak, a crony of Slegor's. His eyes met Cassandra's as he said the name, and he saw understanding drawn there. Slegor had tried to have Cassandra executed when she and Will had been among the Scandians. Later, she had discovered his part in a ploy to betray the Scandian forces to the Temanjai. Alice saw the byplay between Will and the blonde princess. Her lips tightened slightly, but, trained diplomat as she was, she swiftly composed her features before anyone noticed. Slegor, the king said. But surely he's dead. Erak had him executed for treason at the end of the war, didn't he? I tried to convince him not to, Cassandra put in. I thought it was a bad idea, and I felt responsible, I suppose. The king shook his head. No, it's unpleasant, my dear, but it had to be done. Slegor betrayed his country in a time of war. You can't leave people like that unpunished. He deserved what he got, and you had nothing to blame yourself for. The princess has a point, however, Holt said. As the others looked at him, he went on to explain. Executing a criminal often makes a martyr of him. Once he's dead and gone, people tend often to forget the crimes he's committed and start to see a more saintized version of him. A person like that starts to be a victim, then a figurehead for anyone who has an axe to grind. No pun intended, he added, remembering that Slegor had been beheaded. Will nodded in agreement. That's pretty much the way Erak sees it. According to Svengal, Toshak, the leader of the rebel clique, doesn't give a fig about Slegor's fate. He's using him as a symbol to further his own purpose, which is to take over as Oberjarl. The king nodded slowly. It made sense. Which is why Erak doesn't want Svengal to go back to Scandia with the news that he's been captured, and that it'll cost the Scandians 80,000 reals to get him back. It might be quicker and cheaper just to elect a new Oberjarl. Sir Rodney had listened to the conversation so far without speaking. Now he frowned thoughtfully and posed a question. Given that there are many people who want Erak out of the way, that's still no proof that they were involved in this capture, isn't it? He asked. After all, that might just have been good luck on the part of the Aridi. Will nodded. That could be right, Sir Rodney, but there's more to it. The Scandian raiding fleet meets before any raiding season and assigns territories by lot. So the other captains, and Toshak was among them, knew Erak's ship would be raiding that part of the coast. Still, Crowley said, Rodney has a good point. It could have been simple luck on the Aridi's part that allowed them to ambush Erak. They could have heard a wolf ship was in the area and set a trap, arranging to sell him the false timetable. There's no hard evidence that Toshak was involved. Except for one thing, Horace put in. He felt Will was being besieged on all sides, and might need a little help. They weren't just waiting for any wolf ship. They knew it was Erak who was coming, and they knew he was the Oberjarl. Only a Scandian could have told them that. Rodney and Crowley both nodded thoughtfully, seeing the logic in the argument. Cassandra was watching her father anxiously. She felt that they were getting off the real point. "We'll lend Erak the money, won't we, Dad?" she asked. Her father looked up at her. He was inclined to do so, but he hadn't totally made up his mind. 80,000 was a lot of money. Not a crippling amount, admittedly, but it wasn't a sum you'd just throw away. "I'm sure Erak is good for the money, Your Majesty," Halt said. He had already decided that, in the unlikely event that Duncan wouldn't agree to the loan, he would go and shake Erak free of the clutches of the Aridi tribesmen. Yes, Duncan said, still considering. "And the actual amount is sure to be less. The Aridi would be insulted if we didn't haggle a little." "I owe Erak my life, Father," Cassandra said quietly, but firmly. The use of the word father alerted Duncan to the fact that she was beginning to think that he might be reluctant to help Erak. Before he could say anything, she continued, "Not just when he helped Will and me to escape, but later when Slager exposed my true identity and he tried to have me killed. Erak was ready to get me away then." Duncan raised a hand to calm her down. He could hear her voice rising in pitch, and he didn't want a confrontation with so many people present. "Cassie, I fully intend to pay the ransom. It's the mechanics of the whole thing that is a little difficult." He could see that his statement satisfied his daughter, but she looked puzzled, so he went on. "For a start, I'm not putting 80,000 reals, or whatever the final amount might be, on a wolf ship and waving goodbye as it sails off for Arida. There's too great a chance that would be lost. Storms, shipwrecks, pirates. It's too risky." Lord Anthony coughed apologetically. "There's always the Sicilian Council, Your Majesty," he said, and Duncan nodded in his direction. "That's what I was thinking, Anthony." The Sicilian Council was a cartel that traded in currencies, rather than in goods. They provided a means by which countries could exchange funds without the risk of dispatching actual cash or bullions on long, perilous journeys. Countries deposited money with the Sicilians, who paid interest to the depositor. They also undertook a delivery any amounts that might require transfer, either in fact or as deposits from one country's account to another. The council took a percentage of each transaction as its fee and guaranteed safe passage of the funds as part of its service. The risk of loss during transfers was more than covered by the fee. "Are the Aridi signatories to the Sicilian agreements, Anthony?" Duncan asked his chamberlain now. Lord Anthony's face twisted in thought. "I doubt it, Your Majesty. At the last listing, they weren't there. In which case you'll have to arrange for the council to do an actual cash delivery, which means someone will have to negotiate the terms and the final amount with the Aridi, and get them to agree with the arrangement, and the fee will be paid to the Sicilians. Fees were usually paid by both sender and receiver." "I can do that, Your Majesty," said Halt quickly. But the king shook his head. "No, I'm afraid you can't, Halt. There's a protocol involved. We're dealing with the ransom of a ruler of a country, and on the particular side, there are negotiations to be carried out. That needs someone of high rank, a national seal bearer. It's a matter of national funds, so it needs someone of royal rank. Ideally, I should go myself." Halt shrugged. "That would be fine with him." Then Duncan added in a frustrated tone, "But I can't at the moment. I'm supposed to be organizing peace talks between 4 of the 6 Hibernian kings. They'll fall apart if I don't arbitrate among them." "Then give me your seal and I'll go in your place. We'll say I'm your long-lost cousin," Halt said. He had very little patience for the proper way of doing things. Duncan sighed and looked at Crowley. "Have you ever explained to your wild man how the system of the royal seals and signets works in the civilized world, Crowley?" Crowley raised his eyebrows. He suspected that Halt had engaged in numerous fraudulent activities to do with royal seals over the past 20 years, but this time, they couldn't take the risk. The royal seal can only be used by a member of the royal family, as you know, Halt, said Lord Anthony. If you were to use it, any negotiations you carried out, and any agreements you reached, would be fraudulent and therefore void. And if that were exposed, it would take years for Heirloom to regain the trust of other countries. We can't risk that. Halt snorted, his usual reaction to formalities and protocols. Lady Pauline placed a calming hand over his own, and he looked at her and shrugged apologetically. Then, trying to keep his voice reasonable, he asked, "Couldn't you give me a warrant to act on your behalf? Sign over your seal?" "If it were any other country, Teutland or Gallica, for example, that's exactly what I'd do," Duncan replied. "But unfortunately, even though the Arides speak the common tongue, they have their own alphabet and written language, which bears no resemblance to ours. We have nobody who can write or read it, and presumably they have nobody who can read ours. So a warrant authorizing you to act on my behalf might as well be a shopping list with a seal at the bottom." Duncan paused, chewing the bottom of his lip in frustration. "No, I'll have to go myself," he said. "But I'll have to wait till I've dealt with the Hibernians." "There must be some other way," Halt insisted. "The answer is staring us all right in the face," Cassandra said. "I'll go."